That tells you that there is something out there.
Pretty hard to spoof that.
Absolutely. Los Alamos, Oak Ridge National Labs, MacDill Air Force Base, Edwards Air Force Base, the remote test site in Nevada, also known as Air Force Flight Test Center Detachment 3. That's the actual terminology for Groom Lake facility.
From what I hear you guys saying, there's something.
I don't know who's building it, who's got the technology, who's got the brains, but there's something out there that better than our airplane.
So it's not us, that's one thing we know.
We know that.
I could say that with a very high degree of confidence.
For someone to try to bust down the walls, it's not going to happen. You'd have to go to all these facilities, get into their vaults, then bring that out as a united coalition. Not one person couldn't do it. It would take a united coalition of acknowledged scientists to come forward with it. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you again for taking the time to meet with me. I really do appreciate it. And I just want to remind everyone to please subscribe to this channel so that we can continue this crusade. This is absolutely a crusade. And in a few days from now, we're going to be going live and we'll be pushing out more cases as well. So I prepared 5 more historical cases for you, and I have the references to back them up. We'll go ahead and start tonight with the first case. And this is June 14th, 1949. White Sands Missile Range, and I'll set the scene for you here. Illustration I did quite a long time ago. So we have this naval group who's doing this upper atmospheric test at White Sands Missile Range. They shoot off this missile, and then out of nowhere comes these 16-inch diameter, you could call them chrome-colored spheres that come chasing this missile. Now, this missile is traveling 2,000 feet per second. That's about 1,363 miles an hour. And these 2 spheres are following this missile. No visible means of propulsion, no flight controls, unmanned for sure. And if you look at this illustration that I've done here, the ball on the left dropped down, then went to the right, went through the exhaust of the missile itself, joined the one on the right, and then both of them peeled away from this missile at something like 2,500 feet per second, leaving the missile in the dust. This is back in 1949. Ladies and gentlemen, who is operating these? Who is building these back in 1949? Just an incredible case. Our reference for this, again, I've got that on the bottom here. This is NICAP and uninvited guests. So we'll move on to the next case now. All right, this is a very interesting case. July 13th, 1959, Blenheim, New Zealand. Primary eyewitness was milking the cows at the time, and she noticed emerging from this dark cloud came these eerie green lights. There were 2 of them. It got a little bit closer, and then she saw that these green lights were coming and emitting from the bottom of a 30-foot diameter disc-shaped craft. Now, this disc-shaped craft had 2 counter-rotating rings of flames that were coming out of the outer circumference of the craft itself. We'll move on to the next slide so you can get a better idea of what this thing actually looks like here. So this is a drawing I did a long time ago. Flaming jet UFO, July 13th, 1959, Blenheim, New Zealand. And you can see these tongues of flame coming on the outer circumference of the craft, about 25 feet in diameter, approximately 8 feet tall. And on the upper section of the craft itself, it had this not clear transparent dome, but it was more of a rectangular dome. And she said that she could see these quote unquote pilots or beings that were wearing these helmets that came down to their shoulders. That's what these things look like. And we'll move on to the next slide here. Now, as it got closer, when the craft got near her vicinity, whatever these tongues of flames were, they stopped. And she noticed that a light turned on. And she could see these 2 beings. One of them actually stood up and kind of pressed his hand and head against the window like he was looking down. And the next thing that happened is one of these beings emerged from the craft. And when we go to the next slide, I'm going to show you what this looked like here. This is what, ladies and gentlemen, the being looked like. It looked like a man. He was kind of wearing this one-piece flight suit that looked like it came from the Mercury space program. That's what it looked like, kind of wrinkled. Now, he had this helmet that came down to his shoulder, and then he had this breathing apparatus connected to 3 tubes that led up to the bottom of the helmet itself. On his left hand that you see here, he had a cone-shaped device, and this is the 3rd time that we've heard about this cone-shaped hand device. Now, when we move on to the next slide, I'm going to give you an idea, a little bit of a blow up here. Again, this is by my good friend Tom Bogan. Now, he also had some type of an instrument right on his chest, and he had this pentagon-shaped cutout window with the face of a man. It was definitely a face of a man. And again, this cone-shaped hand on his left side of his body here. Now, he screamed at the primary eyewitness in some type of a language that she didn't know. She couldn't figure it out. The being went back into the craft, and then these tongues of flame started up again, and then this craft flew away at a slow rate of speed. And we'll move on to the next case now. Okay, I dug this out of the QFOS archives. I doubt it's ever been seen before, and we're going to show it to you here for the first time, December 26, 1972. This is Venezuela. All right, let me set this up. So the primary eyewitnesses are on the top floor of their 14th floor apartment complex, December 26, 1972. So you've got the husband, you've got the wife, and you've got their young daughter. Now they're looking off to the east, and they're expecting to see this Convair commercial airliner approaching. But this time, ladies and gentlemen, that wasn't the case. What he actually saw, and he thought that this was a flame within the engine nacelle of the airliner. He saw this interesting, strange colored flame approaching his location. As it got closer, this was no commercial airliner. This was about a 50-foot long elliptical shaped craft that kind of tapered back to the end, and it was kind of saw cut out. It had 2 half hemispherical domes that looked like insulators, and then separating by about 6 inches, there was these electrodes with this continuous blue arcing spark or electrode between these 2 half hemispherical domes. Now, on the back of this, wrapped around the back and kind of like near 1/3 back from the leading edge of the craft, there were these cast iron exhaust ports with these lasagna noodle flames coming out of them that didn't look like campfire flames, but actually looked like electrical discharges. Now I want to move it ahead to the next slide. I'm going to give you an idea here, drawing of what this thing looks like. So you can see these, I've done this drawing here that shows you these cast iron exhaust ports. We've got the side detail showing you these lasagna noodle flames. Now he said that it almost looked like someone took a butter knife and chopped these things off. So this was no flame. This is more of a electrical discharge. You can see on the bottom of this with these electrodes and these half hemispherical domes. We'll move ahead to the next slide here. I'll give you an idea of what that looked like. So he definitely said that on the bottom of the craft, again, there was this double half hemispherical insulators. Between these, there was this continuous arc, blue light arc going on, like it was some type of a spark gap and kind of a welder's arc. That's what it looked like. Very strange electrical, high voltage electricity, you could say, was going between these. We'll move on to the next slide, and I'm going to give you an idea of what these strange cast iron exhaust ports look like. Can you imagine seeing this? So what this thing actually did is it continued on its flight path. It made a 45-degree angle tip up. It basically missed the buildings, continued on its flight path. But before it did all that, the father told his daughter to go run next door to the neighbor's house to get a pair of binoculars. She brought those back in time, and he looked through these binoculars and got a very detailed look at this craft. So we have his testimony, we have his flight path, we have his original sketch. It's a done deal, folks. This is another one of these historical cases. We'll move on to the next case now. All right. Primary eyewitness, it's November 1994, it's Repton, England. Primary eyewitness is driving down the road, it's early in the morning. Now he sees this diversionary road off to the light that avoids this bridge. So he's going on this road. He looks off to the right, ladies and gentlemen, and he sees this interesting lighted field. And then about, you could say about 20 seconds later, about 70 feet above his head, is this strange 60-foot long elliptical shaped craft. It had a notch cut out at the end of it. It had 2 beaming spotlights out in front. And then, ladies and gentlemen, and this has come up multiple times now, we see these tubes, pipes, and cylinders and muffler devices and silencers. Some people call these things, quote, it looked like it came from a Midas muffler plant. That's what this thing looked like. These pipes and cylinders. Very strange. Now let's move on to the next slide. I'm going to give you the reference for this. And here's the reference for it. It's Burton Daily Mail, England, February 17th, 1995. So just want to give you the sources of where I'm getting this information. I'm not just pulling this out of my hat. We actually do have some references for this. We'll move on to the next slide now. Okay, so this is an illustration I put together, but can you imagine looking up and seeing all these pipes and cylinders and silencers? What is this? What is the purpose of this? Is this a cooling apparatus for a superconductor using liquid nitrogen? It's certainly the possibility, because superconductors only become conductive when they're super chilled down to a very low temperature. So we'll move on to the next slide now. Okay, so 1994, Atoxeter, England. Primary eyewitness is driving down the road. It's early in the morning. He's on his commute, and all of a sudden, his motorcycle conks out of the clear blue. His motorcycle conks out. Next thing he knows, he looks up and he sees a square. And on the bottom of the square, there's these white lights shining down. And then again, this is like the 15th time now, these tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of the square itself. And he notices as this thing moves off to the side, this is not a square. This is the base of a large pyramid. That's what this thing actually looked like. Now we'll move on to the next slide, and we'll give you the reference for it here. This is another one of these Burton Daily Mail. This is England, March 3rd, 1995. Now I'll give you the backstory. He ended up, by this time, his motorcycle had completely died on him. He had to walk his bike 3 miles back to his home. And when two weeks later, when investigators got to him, one of the investigators was getting ready to pull out one of his silver Zippo lighters because he was going to light a cigarette. And the second he did that, this metal lighter leapt out of his hand and went right to the gas tank. The entire motorcycle was magnetized. So this is a CE1 case, and it's a CE2 case because it had physical effects. And we'll move on to the next slide here. So I went ahead and did some cardstock models that you can see, very simple to build. And if we move to the next slide, I'm going to show you what the bottom of these things actually look like. So again, here's these tubes, pipes, and cylinders with these lights. Is this some type of a nuclear reactor cooling device? This is what we should think about. It looks like someone made a breakthrough. Someone has definitely made a breakthrough. And then we'll go ahead and move on to the next case here in our presentation for today. July 9th, 1995, Grovos Mills, Missouri. Now, there were 4 witnesses that saw this craft. They were in a field, they were younger, in their 20s. What they described seeing is this strange double flying saucer. You could say it had kind of a separating device. It had multicolors around the outer circumference of the craft itself. But what's interesting is that there were these beams of lights or shafts of lights coming down from the bottom of the craft. And then there was these continuous white orbs that were going up and down within these shafts of light. Now, at this point, these witnesses got really afraid and they bailed out of here. They drove away. They actually had one of the eyewitnesses was extremely upset. That witness was brought back to her car. She drove that to a friend's house, and they all agreed to meet at the friend's house later. Now, 2.5 hours later, none of these friends showed up. So she began to get back into her car and was driving to this location where they were all supposed to rendezvous later. That never happened. She ended up seeing, if you look in the back of this illustration, ladies and gentlemen, you'll see this 6-story tall flying triangle that was associated with this craft. Now, was this a mothership for this craft? We don't know. There is a possible secondhand portion of this case that we may go in at a later time, but this is a very significant case because there were 4 eyewitnesses that saw this, and the source for this is the Acton Advisor number 3, 1995. So again, I want to thank you for your attention today. We've considered at least 5 more cases. What are these pipes? What are these cylinders? We need to keep on looking at that. And I want to thank you for your attention, and please subscribe to this channel so we can continue this crusade. Thanks again.
And that tells you that there is something out there.
Pretty hard to spoof that.
Absolutely. Los Alamos, Oak Ridge National Labs, MacDill Air Force Base, Edwards Air Force Base, the remote test site in Nevada, also known as Air Force Flight Test Center Detachment 3. That's the actual terminology for Groom Lake facility.
From what I hear you guys saying, there's something.
I don't know who's building it, who's got the technology, who's got the brains, but there's something out there that better than our airplane.
So it's not us, that's one thing we know.
We know that.
I could say that with a very high degree of confidence.
For someone to try to bust down the walls, it's not going to happen. You'd have to go to all these facilities, get into their vaults, then bring that out as a united coalition. Not one person couldn't do it. It would take a united coalition of acknowledged scientists to come forward with it.